My name is Geraldine, and I am 65 years old. I sit here in this big, empty house, looking out at the garden Harold planted 40 years ago, watching the roses he loved bloom without him. 3 years have passed since my husband died, and I thought I knew my children. I thought the love we poured into Jessica and Marcus would last forever. But sometimes the people closest to you can become strangers overnight. What they did not know was that Harold left me more than just memories. Hidden in our safe was something that would change everything. That night, after my daughter slapped me and my son applauded, I walked to that safe with trembling hands. Before I share what happened that changed everything, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story about family betrayal and the power of standing up for yourself might just surprise you. Let me take you back to the beginning, when life was golden and full of promise. Harold and I met in 1978 at a real estate seminar in downtown Chicago. He was this charming man with calloused hands and big dreams, working construction during the day and studying property investment at night. I was fresh out of college with a business degree and enough determination to move mountains. We married 2 years later in a simple ceremony at the local church. Our honeymoon was 3 days in a cabin by Lake Michigan because that was all we could afford. Harold promised me that someday we would have everything we ever dreamed of, and I believed him with every fiber of my being. Those early years were tough but beautiful. We lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread waking us every morning. Harold would leave at 5:30 for construction sites, while I worked at a small accounting firm. Every evening we would sit at our kitchen table, spreading out real estate listings and bank statements, planning our future empire. Our first property purchase was a run-down duplex that needed everything. We spent weekends covered in paint and sawdust, learning plumbing and electrical work from library books. I still remember the day we got our first rent check. Harold picked me up and spun me around our empty living room, both of us crying with joy. By the time Jessica was born in 1986, we owned 3 rental properties. Marcus followed 3 years later, and our little family felt complete. I took time off to raise them, while Harold expanded the business. We were partners in everything, sharing dreams, decisions, and the daily challenges of building something from nothing. The children grew up surrounded by love and stability. We moved to our current house when Jessica was 10, this beautiful 8-bedroom colonial that Harold designed himself. He wanted each child to have their own space, plus guest rooms, for the family we hoped would visit often. Harold taught the kids about hard work and respect. Every summer, they helped with property maintenance, painting fences, and cleaning apartments. Jessica complained, but Marcus seemed to enjoy the physical labor. We thought we were raising them right, teaching them the value of money and family loyalty. Our business grew steadily over the decades. By the time Harold turned 60, we owned 47 rental units across 3 counties, plus a commercial building downtown. Our investment portfolio was worth millions, but we lived modestly. Harold always said money was a tool, not a master. The children went to good colleges. Jessica studied marketing, and Marcus chose business administration. We paid their tuition gladly, proud to give them opportunities we never had. They seemed grateful then, calling home regularly and visiting during breaks with stories about their studies and friends. After graduation, both kids moved away to start their careers. Jessica landed a marketing job in California, while Marcus found work with a consulting firm in Atlanta. We supported their independence, sending care packages and visiting when we could. Harold and I enjoyed our empty nest years. We traveled more, took cooking classes, and volunteered at local charities. Our marriage had only grown stronger with time. We would sit on our back porch every evening, holding hands and planning retirement adventures. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed in an instant. Harold had a massive heart attack while working in his garden. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The man who had been my partner, my best friend, my everything was gone at age 62. The children came home for the funeral, grief-stricken and supportive. They stayed for 2 weeks, helping with arrangements and sorting through Harold's immediate affairs. I was grateful for their presence during those dark days, thinking we would grow closer through shared loss. But slowly, things began to feel different. Jessica started making comments about the house being too big for me alone. Marcus worried about my safety, mentioning security systems and emergency buttons. Their concern felt genuine at first, like natural worry for their widowed mother. The first real warning sign came about 6 months after Harold passed. Jessica flew in for what she called a family meeting, bringing printed articles about seniors living alone and statistics about accidents in large homes. She sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Harold and I had planned our dreams, and suggested I consider assisted living. I was stunned. At 62, I was healthy, active, and perfectly capable of managing my own life. I had been handling the business finances for decades and knew every detail of our holdings. But Jessica spoke as if I were already helpless, using words like safety and support that felt more like threats than comfort. Marcus arrived the next day with his new wife Priscilla, whom he had married just 4 months earlier in a quick courthouse ceremony. Something about her felt off from the moment we met. She was sweet enough on the surface, but her eyes stayed cold even when she smiled. During dinner, she kept asking detailed questions about the house, the business, and my daily routines. I noticed how Marcus deferred to his wife in ways that seemed unlike him. He had always been independent and thoughtful, but now he echoed whatever Priscilla suggested. When she agreed with Jessica about the assisted living idea, Marcus nodded along automatically. The conversation grew heated when I firmly refused to consider moving. I explained that this house held 40 years of memories, that Harold and I had planned to live here until our final days. Jessica's tone sharpened, suggesting I was being emotional rather than practical. That night, I heard them talking in hushed voices in the guest room. I could not make out specific words, but the tone was clearly conspiratorial. When I mentioned it the next morning, they claimed they were just worried about me and discussing ways to help. Over the following weeks, strange things began happening. Jessica started calling daily, always asking about my memory and whether I had forgotten appointments or conversations. She would reference things I supposedly said that I had no memory of saying. When I protested, she would sigh and say that forgetting these conversations proved her point about my declining faculties. Marcus began visiting more frequently, always with Priscilla in tow. They would go through my mail, claiming to help organize important documents. Priscilla volunteered to update my filing system, spending hours in Harold's old office, going through papers I had managed perfectly well on my own. During one visit, I caught her photographing documents with her phone. When confronted, she claimed she was just making copies to help organize everything better. But something about her explanation felt rehearsed, and I noticed she quickly deleted the photos when she thought I was not watching. The children started bringing up Harold's death more frequently, suggesting that the stress and shock had affected my judgment more than I realized. They painted my grief as evidence of incompetence, as if mourning my husband of 40 years made me unfit to manage my own affairs. Friends and neighbors began treating me differently, too. Later, I discovered that Jessica had been calling them, expressing concern about my mental state, and asking them to watch for signs of confusion or forgetfulness. She painted herself as a devoted daughter, struggling to care for an aging mother who would not accept help. One afternoon, I found business cards in my purse for senior care services and memory care facilities. When I asked Jessica about them, she claimed I had requested them during our last phone call. I knew this was untrue, but she seemed so certain that I began questioning my own memory. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. They would mention conversations that never happened, appointments I allegedly missed, and decisions I supposedly made that seemed completely unlike me. Each incident was small enough to dismiss, but together they formed a pattern that made me doubt my own mind. Most disturbing was the way they spoke about Harold's wishes. They claimed he had expressed concerns about my ability to handle things alone, conversations I knew never occurred. Harold had always trusted my judgment completely, and often said I was the smarter one in our partnership. I began keeping a journal to track these incidents, writing down actual conversations and events as they happened. This simple act helped me realize how systematically they were trying to undermine my confidence and independence. The pressure intensified dramatically over the next several months. Jessica began bringing Dr. Hamilton to Sunday dinners, introducing him as a family friend who happened to be a geriatric psychiatrist. He would engage me in casual conversation that felt more like impromptu mental evaluations, asking about dates, names, and recent events. During these dinners, Jessica and Marcus would exchange meaningful looks whenever I paused to think or asked someone to repeat a question. Dr. Hamilton would nod sympathetically and make subtle comments about the challenges of aging and the importance of family support during difficult transitions. The financial pressure started around the same time. Marcus suggested that managing rental properties had become too stressful for me and offered to take over the day-to-day operations. He presented detailed plans for modernizing our systems and improving efficiency, making it sound like a generous offer to help rather than an attempt to gain control. When I declined pointing out that I had been successfully managing these properties for decades, Priscilla jumped in with statistics about elderly people being targeted by financial scams. She suggested that having Marcus oversee things would protect me from potential fraud, as if I were some helpless victim rather than an experienced businesswoman. Jessica escalated her campaign by researching guardianship laws and presenting the information as general education about protecting aging parents. She left brochures around my house about the legal process for when elderly people could no longer make sound decisions for themselves. The most manipulative tactic was their use of Harold's memory against me. They would claim he had expressed specific wishes about my care, saying he worried about me living alone and wanted the children to watch over me closely. These alleged conversations always seemed to support whatever they were currently pushing me to do. I knew these claims were fabricated because Harold and I discussed everything openly. If he had concerns about my future, he would have shared them with me directly. Instead, he had always praised my strength and independence, often saying I was the toughest person he knew. One evening, I overheard Priscilla on the phone in the guest room, speaking in hushed tones about timelines and legal procedures. I caught fragments about convincing me gradually and the importance of documenting incidents that demonstrated my declining capacity. When she noticed me listening, she quickly ended the call and claimed she was talking to her sister about work stress. The isolation tactics became more obvious too. When my longtime friends would call or visit Jessica, and Marcus would intercept explaining that I was having a difficult day or needed rest, they gradually convinced my social circle that I was fragile and required protection from overstimulation. They began monitoring my activities more closely, asking detailed questions about where I went, whom I saw, and what I did each day. Any variation from routine was treated as evidence of confusion or poor judgment. If I forgot a minor detail or mixed up a date, they would react with exaggerated concern and meaningful glances at each other. The breaking point came when I discovered documents in Priscilla's purse during one of their visits. While she was in the bathroom, I glimpsed papers that looked official and legal. When I tried to examine them more closely, Marcus returned and quickly distracted me, while Priscilla retrieved her purse. That night, I could not sleep. Every instinct told me something terrible was being planned, but I had no concrete proof. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by people who claimed to love me, while systematically undermining everything I had built with Harold. I began secretly recording some of our conversations, using a small device Harold had given me years earlier for recording business meetings. The recordings revealed how they spoke differently when they thought I was not paying attention, discussing strategies and timelines with cold calculation. Everything culminated in the nightmare that was my 65th birthday celebration. Jessica had insisted on throwing me a party, claiming it would lift my spirits and reconnect me with old friends. I was hesitant, sensing an ulterior motive, but she had already sent invitations and made all the arrangements. The guest list included neighbors, family friends, and several people I barely knew. Jessica explained that she wanted to celebrate my life and all the relationships I had built over the years. But something about the mix of people felt calculated, as if she had carefully chosen witnesses for some performance she had planned. Marcus and Priscilla arrived early that morning, both seeming unusually nervous and excited. They bustled around my house, rearranging furniture and setting up decorations with an energy that felt forced. Priscilla kept checking her phone and whispering urgent instructions to Marcus about timing and positioning. As guests began arriving, I noticed how Jessica positioned herself as the hostess, greeting everyone at the door and explaining how grateful the family was for their support during this difficult time. She spoke as if I were already incapacitated, describing challenges and concerns that existed only in her imagination. The party itself felt surreal, like watching actors perform a play about my life. Jessica gave a lengthy speech about my contributions to the community and the family, but every compliment was paired with subtle suggestions about my current struggles and need for support. Dar Hamilton circulated through the crowd, engaging guests in conversations about aging parents and the difficult decisions families face when independence becomes dangerous. Several people approached me afterward with sympathetic comments about how lucky I was to have such caring children. The tension reached its peak when Jessica stood up to make an announcement. She thanked everyone for coming and began describing the family's concerns about my well-being. She spoke about memory issues, poor judgment, and safety concerns with the practiced delivery of someone who had rehearsed this speech many times. I felt my face burning with humiliation as she painted me as a confused, fragile woman who could no longer care for herself. The guests listened with polite attention, occasionally glancing at me with pity. I wanted to interrupt to defend myself, but something held me back. Then, Jessica produced a folder of documents explaining that the family had made arrangements for my care and protection. She spoke about guardianship as if it were a gift, a way to ensure I would never have to worry about difficult decisions again. That was when I finally found my voice. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking with anger, and told the room exactly what was happening. I explained how my children had spent months gaslighting me, undermining my confidence, and planning to steal my independence and assets. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went white, then red with rage. She began shouting that I was having an episode, that this paranoid outburst proved exactly what they had been saying about my mental state. But I continued speaking, my voice growing stronger as I detailed their manipulation tactics, their fake concern, and their obvious financial motivations. I told the guests about the guardianship documents, the recordings I had made, and the systematic campaign to isolate me from my support system. That was when Jessica lost control completely. She lunged forward and slapped me hard across the face, screaming that I was an ungrateful, delusional, old woman who could not see that they were trying to help me. The sound of the slap echoed through the silent room. But worse than the physical pain was what happened next. Marcus began clapping slowly, saying that his sister had done what needed to be done, that I clearly could not be reasoned with anymore. Priscilla smirked openly, no longer bothering to hide her satisfaction. She told the shocked guests that this outburst was exactly the kind of behavior the family had been dealing with, proof that I needed professional care and supervision. Several guests left immediately, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Others stayed, but seemed uncertain about what to believe. Jessica quickly spun the narrative, explaining that these episodes were becoming more frequent and violent, that they feared for everyone's safety. I stood there alone in my own living room, my cheek stinging from my daughter's hand, watching my son applaud my humiliation. In that moment, I realized that the children I had raised and loved unconditionally had become strangers, capable of unspeakable cruelty. The party ended quickly after that. The remaining guests made polite excuses and left, shooting me sympathetic but confused glances. Jessica, Marcus, and Priscilla gathered their things with the satisfied air of people who had accomplished their mission. As they prepared to leave, Jessica handed me a business card for a memory care facility, suggesting I call them in the morning to arrange a tour. Marcus added that they would be back in a few days to help me pack the essentials. They walked out of my house that night, believing they had won, that my public breakdown had sealed my fate and cleared their path to control my life and assets. They had no idea that their victory celebration was premature. That night, alone in the house, that suddenly felt like a mausoleum, I sat in Harold's favorite chair and stared at our wedding photo on the mantel. The silence was absolute, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock he had restored with such care. I touched my burning cheek and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was transforming into something harder, more focused. These people who had just humiliated me in my own home were not my children anymore. They were strangers, wearing familiar faces, and I refused to be their victim. Harold's voice seemed to whisper in my memory, reminding me of conversations we had during his final months. He worried about what would happen if our children ever showed their true colors after he was gone. He made me promise that if they ever tried to take advantage of my grief or underestimate my strength, I would fight back with everything we had built together. I walked slowly to his office, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Harold's desk sat exactly as he had left it, covered with property reports and investment statements. But I was not here for those visible assets. I was here for the secrets he had hidden, the insurance policy he had created for exactly this situation. The safe was behind a false panel he had installed himself, concealed so cleverly that even I sometimes forgot its location. The combination was our wedding date, then the year Jessica was born, then the year Marcus followed. Harold had chosen those numbers because he said family should be the key to everything important. How ironic that family had become my greatest threat, and that same combination would now unlock their destruction. Inside the safe was everything Harold had prepared for a day he hoped would never come. Along with our marriage certificate and the deed to our first house, I found the documents that would change everything. The first was an alternate will one that Harold had created with his private attorney, William Sterling, just 2 years before his death. This version was quite different from the will our family knew about, the one that left everything equally to Jessica and Marcus, with me retaining control until my death. This secret will contain clauses Harold called his insurance policy. If either child ever attempted to have me declared incompetent, sought guardianship without clear medical cause, or showed evidence of elder abuse, their inheritance would be immediately revoked. Every asset would instead go to the Harold and Geraldine Foundation, a charity we had established but never funded. The next item was a cashier's check made out to me for $9 million, Harold's way of ensuring I would have immediate access to liquid assets if our children ever tried to freeze accounts or control my finances. The accompanying note, written in his careful handwriting, said simply, "For your new beginning, my love, you deserve better than ungrateful children." But the most damaging evidence was a collection of recordings Harold had made during his final year. He had suspected that Marcus, and especially Jessica, viewed our wealth with too much interest and not enough respect. These recordings captured conversations where they discussed their inheritance with disturbing casualness, making plans for money that was not yet theirs. I spent the entire night reading through legal documents, listening to recordings, and understanding the full scope of what Harold had prepared. He had known this day might come, and he had given me every tool I would need to protect myself and honor his true wishes. By dawn, I had formed a complete plan. My children thought they were dealing with a confused, helpless widow who would surrender without a fight. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I called William Sterling's emergency number at 6:30 in the morning. Harold's longtime friend and legal advisor listened quietly as I explained the situation and told him it was time to implement the contingency plans we had discussed years earlier. William confirmed that everything was legally sound and that the evidence I had was overwhelming. He arranged an emergency meeting for that afternoon and advised me to act normally until we were ready to strike back. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The victim was gone, replaced by the strong woman Harold had fallen in love with, the partner who had helped him build an empire from nothing. My children had made the mistake of underestimating me, and they were about to pay dearly for that error. The 3 days that followed would be the most satisfying of my life as I watched their arrogance crumble and their true characters emerge under pressure. They thought they had won the war with one battle, but they had only awakened an enemy they never knew existed. The first day of my counterattack, I played the role of defeated mother perfectly. When Jessica called to check on me, I sounded tired and resigned. When Marcus stopped by with guardianship papers, I told him I needed time to think, but seemed broken and compliant. They exchanged satisfied smiles, believing their public humiliation had accomplished its purpose. Priscilla even had the audacity to pat my hand sympathetically while explaining how much easier my life would become once I stopped fighting their help. That afternoon, while they celebrated their anticipated victory at an expensive restaurant, I met with William Sterling in his downtown office. Harold's old friend had aged considerably since the funeral, but his mind remained sharp as ever. William reviewed all the evidence with the thoroughness that had made him Harold's most trusted advisor. The recordings, the guardianship attempts, and especially the birthday party incident, created an ironclad case for elder abuse and financial exploitation. We spent 3 hours preparing our response timing, each revelation for maximum impact. William explained that we would not just defend against their attack, but completely destroy their position. By the time we finished, Jessica and Marcus would lose not only their inheritance, but also face potential criminal charges. The second day brought their first real attempt to implement their plan. Jessica arrived with Dr. Hamilton and a court-appointed social worker, claiming they were conducting a routine wellness check based on family concerns about my mental state. I invited them in graciously, offering tea and cookies as if nothing had happened. Dr. Hamilton began his evaluation with the same condescending questions he had used before, clearly expecting me to display confusion or agitation. Instead, I answered every question, perfectly demonstrated complete awareness of current events, and recited detailed information about my financial holdings with precision that surprised even me. When he suggested I might benefit from professional care, I thanked him for his concern, but declined politely. The social worker seemed puzzled by the disconnect between the family's reports and my obvious competence. I could see Jessica growing increasingly frustrated as her narrative fell apart under scrutiny. That evening, Marcus arrived with Priscilla and a stack of legal documents, insisting we needed to finalize arrangements immediately. He had the arrogance to suggest that my coherent behavior earlier was just a good day, and that we should not wait for the inevitable decline. I listened to their arguments with apparent resignation, occasionally asking questions that made them believe I was wavering. They grew more confident with each perceived sign of surrender, describing their plans for my future with barely concealed enthusiasm about the assets they would control. When they finally presented the guardianship papers and demanded my signature, I looked at them with what they interpreted as defeat. I asked for time to say goodbye to the house Harold and I had shared, to pack personal items that held sentimental value. They agreed magnanimously, setting a meeting for the following day to complete all the paperwork. As they left that night, they were practically gloating about their success. Priscilla whispered to Marcus that she could not wait to redecorate the house and turn it into something more modern. The third day began with their arrival at 10 in the morning, accompanied by their attorney and another witness. They had brought cameras to document my signing of the papers, evidence they could use if I later claimed coercion or incompetence. But when they entered my living room, they found William Sterling waiting at my dining table, surrounded by legal documents and recording equipment. Their confident expressions immediately shifted to confusion, then growing alarm, as they realized something had gone very wrong with their plan. I stood up slowly, no longer playing the role of victim, and began to speak with the clear, strong voice they had not heard since childhood. I told them exactly what I thought of their manipulation, their greed, and their complete lack of respect for the woman who had sacrificed everything to give them good lives. Then, William began reading from Harold's alternate will, explaining how their actions had triggered clauses that immediately revoked their inheritance. He played recordings of their own voices, discussing my assets, as if they were already theirs, planning my institutionalization while I was still grieving their father. Jessica screamed that the recordings were illegal and could not be used against them. Marcus demanded to know when these documents had been created and why they had never been informed. Priscilla alternated between tears and threats, claiming they would fight this in court forever. But William calmly explained that everything had been done properly, with full legal authority, and that their actions over the past months had been documented extensively. The guardianship attempt, the gaslighting campaign, and especially the physical assault at my birthday party had created an overwhelming case for elder abuse. The final blow came when I produced the $9 million check Harold had left me, explaining that this represented just a fraction of assets they would never touch. The remainder would go to charity, ensuring that their greed would benefit people who actually deserved help. I watched their faces as the reality sank in. Everything they had planned, all their manipulation and cruelty, had not only failed, but had cost them everything they thought they were entitled to inherit. They had played a game against an opponent who had been planning this defense for years. As they left my house that day, screaming threats and accusations, I felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I had experienced since Harold's death. I had honored his wishes, protected myself, and taught them the most important lesson of their lives: actions have consequences. 2 years have passed since that confrontational afternoon, and my life has transformed in ways I never expected. I am writing this from my cozy apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, the same body of water where Harold and I honeymooned all those decades ago. Selling the big house was easier than I anticipated. Without the emotional attachment to impressing ungrateful children, I realized that 8 bedrooms and endless maintenance had become burdens rather than blessings. This small place, with its panoramic water view, feels more like home than anywhere I have lived since Harold died. The Harold and Geraldine Foundation has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. We provide housing assistance to elderly people who face financial exploitation from family members, legal aid for those fighting guardianship, abuse, and counseling for seniors recovering from emotional manipulation. Every month, I meet people whose stories mirror my own, and together, we heal from betrayals that cut deeper than any stranger's cruelty could. My days are filled with purpose and genuine relationships. The volunteer work connects me with people who value my experience and wisdom rather than viewing my age as weakness. I have formed friendships with women who understand that strength comes not from avoiding hardship, but from surviving it with dignity intact. The financial freedom Harold provided has allowed me to live comfortably while supporting causes we both cared about. Without the stress of managing rental properties or worrying about inheritance battles, I have discovered interests I never had time to pursue. I am learning photography, taking cooking classes, in planning trips to places Harold and I always meant to visit together. News about Jessica and Marcus reaches me occasionally through mutual acquaintances. Jessica had to sell her California house when her marketing career stalled, and she has struggled to find stable employment. Marcus and Priscilla divorced within 6 months of losing their anticipated inheritance. Their relationship apparently built more on shared greed than genuine affection. Both of my children have attempted reconciliation through letters, phone calls, and intermediaries. Jessica's apologies sound more desperate than sincere, focused on the financial consequences of her actions rather than genuine remorse for the emotional damage. Marcus seems more authentic in his regret, but his letters still contain subtle hints about forgiveness, leading to restored inheritance. I have learned to distinguish between manipulation, disguised as love, and genuine affection that expects nothing in return. My new friends care about my well-being without measuring their investment against potential returns. The staff at the foundation respects my contributions without calculating my net worth. The healing process took longer than I expected. For months after the confrontation, I struggled with guilt and self-doubt. Had I been too harsh? Were there ways I could have salvaged relationships with my children while still protecting myself? Was financial punishment an appropriate response to emotional abuse? William Sterling, who has become a close friend as well as legal advisor, helped me understand that protecting myself was not cruelty, but necessary self-preservation. Allowing continued abuse would have enabled their behavior and ultimately harmed them as much as me. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. The most profound lesson has been about the difference between love and attachment. I loved the children. I raised the young people who showed kindness, gratitude, and respect for others. But the adults who tried to manipulate and institutionalize me were strangers wearing familiar faces. Learning to grieve the loss of my children while celebrating my freedom from their abuse required accepting that people can change in ways that make continued relationship impossible. Harold's wisdom guided me through the darkest moments. His voice in my memory reminded me that dignity is not negotiable, that self-respect is more valuable than family harmony, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the consequences of their own choices. I sleep peacefully now, surrounded by photographs of genuinely happy memories, rather than obligations to people who view my existence as an inconvenience. My days begin with gratitude for the life Harold and I built together and the strength he gave me to defend it when threatened. Sometimes I wonder if Jessica and Marcus will ever understand what they lost through their greed and cruelty. They sacrificed not only financial security, but also the love and respect of a mother who would have given them everything willingly if they had simply continued treating her with basic human decency. But their understanding is no longer my responsibility. My job now is to live fully in the time I have remaining to honor Harold's memory by using our resources wisely and to help others who face similar challenges with family members who confuse love with control. The apartment is quiet tonight, except for the gentle sound of waves against the shore below. I am alone, but not lonely, free, but not bitter, and stronger than I ever knew possible. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give our children is the lesson that actions have consequences. Love does not mean accepting disrespect, and it is never too late to choose dignity over peace. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family harmony and self-respect? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family resilience and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.